Captain Elias Varkov's boots crunched across the cracked, dusty ground of Omari's 3. The planet was a battlefield, scarred by years of war, where every breath of air tasted like ash. The war had been relentless, but Omari's 3, with its once thriving cities now reduced to ruins, seemed to have taken the brunt of humanity's and the alien forces' fury. It was the kind of place that ground men down until they were little more than ghosts of themselves. And Elias was no stranger to the ghosts. He had his own, each one carved into his memory like a deep scar. As he walked through the skeletal remains of a collapsed building, the hollow echo of his footsteps was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence. His mission was simple, or so he had thought: assess the damage, gather intel on the alien presence, and report back to command. But there was something in the air, something that told him this mission was far more than routine. A nagging feeling, like a whisper at the edge of his consciousness, gnawed at him. His wrist calm crackled to life, pulling him from his thoughts. "Captain, you need to see this." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Tessa Riker, one of his most trusted officers. If she was concerned, then Varkov knew it wasn't just another glitch in the system. He turned, heading for the command center they had set up in the remnants of a military bunker. As he moved, his hand absently brushed the scar across his face, a reminder of a past he preferred to keep buried. Inside the bunker, Riker was waiting, her face drawn with worry. The screen in front of her flickered, showing a series of surveillance images from a remote outpost in the eastern sector. Varkov studied the screen, his brow furrowing as the images revealed nothing but disquieting signs. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Riker zoomed in on the images, revealing a creature, a grotesque amalgamation of what appeared to be human and alien features. Mutated, twisted, its skin a patchwork of scars and lesions, it was unlike anything Varkov had ever seen before. It was a mistake, a disaster, a symbol of something far darker than anything the war had so far brought to light. "Is this?" Varkov's voice trailed off as his mind raced, trying to piece together the implications. "Did the Eryxians create this?" "No, sir," Riker replied, shaking her head. "It's not one of theirs. At least, not in the way we know. This thing, it was human. But something's wrong. I've had the team analyzing it, and the genetic markers, there's manipulation involved." Varkov's mind snapped into focus. He knew the military wasn't beyond conducting dubious experiments, but this was different. This wasn't the desperate measures of a soldier on the front lines, this was something systematic, something planned. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't have to ask the next question. "Who authorized this?" he demanded, his voice sharp, his eyes locked onto Riker's. She hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. I don't know, sir. But it's not the first time we've seen these kinds of anomalies. There are more reports coming in from all over the planet. Mutations like this are becoming more frequent. God help us," Varkov muttered under his breath. He turned away from the screen, his fists clenched at his sides. "We've crossed a line we can't come back from." The weight of the moment hit him hard. He had seen horrors before, he had been part of the war for as long as anyone could remember. But this? This was different. This was not just a battlefield, this was something that could change everything. Humanity had been fighting for survival, but now, he began to question the cost. If their enemies had any inkling of what was happening here, it would be over for them. The truth was something far more dangerous than the weapons they had on the front lines. "Get me the command center," Varkov ordered. "Now." A moment later, the holographic display flickered to life, showing the faces of General Tyron and Colonel Creel, both of them high-ranking officers in the human military leadership. Their faces were a mix of stone and exhaustion, a reflection of the war they had been waging for years. "Captain, report," General Tyron barked. Varkov's gaze hardened. "I've just seen something that's going to change everything. This war, it's not what we thought. The enemy isn't just alien. We've been doing things that go beyond anything I could have imagined. The experiments on this planet, they're human. And they've been manipulating our soldiers. Our people." The silence that followed was thick. Tyron and Creel exchanged a look that Varkov couldn't decipher. The general's voice, when it came, was cold and controlled. You need to be more specific, Captain. What exactly are you implying? Varkov's jaw tightened as he pressed on. I'm saying that these mutations, they're not accidents. They're the result of something engineered, and it's coming from our own side. We're creating abominations, turning our soldiers into monsters. I don't know who authorized this, but I'll find out. The room was quiet for a moment, the tension hanging like a thick fog. General Tyron finally spoke, his voice low but firm. You are to remain on Omari's 3. This is classified information, Captain. Do not act on it without proper orders. We are monitoring the situation. Varkov's temper flared. You don't understand. People are dying out here. People like me. We've got to stop this before it spreads. Understood, Captain, Tyron said, his tone sharp. But I'm giving you an order. Do not investigate this any further. We'll handle it. Varkov's eyes narrowed. I can't do that, sir. I'm not your pawn anymore. The transmission cut off, leaving him staring at the empty air. It was clear, he wasn't going to get any help from his superiors. Whatever was happening on Omari's 3, it was far darker than they were willing to admit. Riker stepped forward, her face grim. What now, Captain? He looked at her, his decision already made. We do it ourselves. We find out who's responsible, and we expose it. No more hiding. We may be soldiers, but we're human first. As the weight of his words settled between them, Varkov knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger. But he also knew one thing with certainty, he couldn't let this war be built on lies. Not anymore. The first explosion came at dawn. A sudden, ear-splitting shockwave ripped through the air, rattling the fragile structures of the makeshift military base. Captain Varkov was jolted from his sleep, the faint taste of dust in the back of his throat. His heart raced as the sirens blared, a shrill wail warning everyone of the attack. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his rifle, his eyes scanning the dim, war-torn sky. They were under fire. Again. Varkov, get moving! Riker's voice came over the comms, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The Eryxian forces are on the move. We're under heavy bombardment, South Sector. His pulse quickened. South Sector. That was where they'd stored the vital intel, files, communication logs, and even the first reports of the human bioexperiments. The information that could bring down everything they had fought for. He couldn't afford to lose it. On my way. Varkov replied, already sprinting toward the command center. He didn't need to be told again. As the explosions continued to echo in the distance, Varkov's mind raced, not with fear, but with determination. This was bigger than a simple attack. It felt like the beginning of something far worse. The bunker doors slammed shut behind him as he entered the command center, breathless, his face streaked with dirt. Lieutenant Riker stood at the center of the chaos, barking orders to the soldiers under her command. She looked up as Varkov entered, her face tense. What's the situation? Varkov asked, scanning the room. His eyes landed on the map laid out on the table, dotted with red markers indicating enemy movements. They're trying to push through the perimeter, Riker said, her voice sharp, focused. We've got a battalion coming in from the east, along with a few bombers. Our defensive lines won't hold for long if they get through. Varkov's thoughts snapped back to the intel. What about the files? Where's the data? Riker hesitated for a moment, then pointed to the east side of the map. That's where the server room is. We've got to secure it, or we lose everything. The urgency in her tone matched Varkov's rising anxiety. He couldn't let the truth slip through their fingers, not now, not when it was so close. Get a team together. We're moving out. I'll handle the server room. Understood, she nodded, before turning to rally the troops. Varkov, however, knew this wasn't just another battle. The enemy wasn't only waiting on the other side of the perimeter. Someone on their side was playing a game, one that could destroy everything humanity had built. Minutes later, Varkov, Riker, and a small squad of soldiers made their way through the smoke-filled streets. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the devastation. The battlefield wasn't just a place of destruction, it was a reflection of the twisted truths Varkov had started to uncover. As they moved deeper into the city, Varkov's mind wandered to the experiments, the mutations. His soldiers weren't just fighting a war, they were part of it, unwitting pawns in a much larger scheme. "Captain!" One of the soldiers, Private Alden, called out from ahead. He had stopped near a collapsed building, pointing to something on the ground. Varkov walked over, his boots crunching over shattered glass and debris. What he saw made his stomach twist. Another mutation. But this one was different. It was no longer just an alien hybrid. It was human, a soldier, once a man, now twisted into something unrecognizable. His skin was mottled with dark veins, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He lay on the ground, trembling, as if in pain. "God," Varkov whispered, kneeling beside the body. "What the hell happened to you?" Riker stepped forward, scanning the body. "It's one of ours. He wasn't always like this. Something changed him." Varkov's hands clenched into fists. His mind raced with questions. "This is it, isn't it? These are the results of the experiments." Riker nodded grimly. "We've been sent to fight monsters, and we've become them." Varkov felt his heart pound in his chest. "We need to stop this. Now." The squad moved on, heading toward the server room, but Varkov couldn't shake the image of the mutated soldier from his mind. Each step felt heavier than the last. If humanity was doing this to its own people, to its own soldiers, then what else had they hidden? They reached the server room minutes later, the door marked with a faded insignia of the military command. Varkov pushed it open, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. There, against the far wall, stood a row of terminals, connected to a central server. The hum of machinery was a welcome sound, it meant they hadn't been compromised yet. Varkov moved quickly, accessing the data from the terminal. He could feel the sweat forming on his brow as he typed in the commands. The information flashed across the screen, confirming his worst fears. Genetic modifications. Biological experiments. And, most damning of all, approval codes signed by high-ranking officials he knew by name. "This is it," Varkov muttered, reading the data. The evidence was undeniable. Humanity had crossed a line. These weren't just defensive experiments. These were weapons of war, designed to alter the very nature of human beings, turning them into something else. And now, they were unleashed. "Varkov," Riker said, her voice tight. "We've got company. They're closing in." The door to the server room slammed open, and a dozen heavily armed soldiers burst inside. But these weren't just ordinary soldiers, these were the mutated ones, their eyes wild, their movements jerky, as if their bodies no longer functioned in harmony. Varkov froze, recognizing the telltale signs from earlier. "Get down!" Varkov shouted, pulling Riker to the ground as the soldiers opened fire. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, tearing into the equipment around them. Varkov's rifle was in his hands before he even realized it, and he returned fire, each shot ringing out in the chaos. "We need to get out of here," Riker yelled, barely dodging a barrage of gunfire. "Not yet," Varkov growled, determined to get the data out. "Cover me." He sprinted to the terminal, rapidly uploading the files to a secure drive as the room continued to explode with gunfire. The mutated soldiers charged at them with reckless fury, but Varkov and his squad held their ground, fighting to survive long enough to complete their mission. Finally, the drive was ready. Varkov grabbed it and shoved it into his pocket. "Let's move," he shouted, grabbing Riker by the arm and pulling her toward the door. But as they made their way out, Varkov couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever they had uncovered, whatever they had learned, would be enough to tear the fabric of humanity apart. Outside, the sky was darkening, and the sounds of battle were growing louder. Varkov knew the truth couldn't stay buried much longer. And the enemy? The enemy was closer than they thought. The sky above Omori's 3 was a sickly shade of orange as the final rays of sunlight fought against the thick, oppressive clouds of smoke. The battlefield was a land of ruin, a graveyard of fallen soldiers and shattered dreams. The war, once distant, had now come to a brutal, unrelenting endgame. Captain Elias Varkov knew this would be the last push, the last fight to expose the truth, and perhaps, the last fight of his life. He crouched behind the remains of a collapsed building, scanning the horizon through the scope of his rifle. His eyes, once full of fire, were now weary. Too much had happened in too little time. The experiments, the betrayals, and the revelations had all led to this moment. The files were safe, encrypted and ready to be sent to the galaxy. But that wasn't enough. The truth had to be delivered to the people, and to do that, he would have to tear through the layers of lies and deception that held humanity's darkest secrets in place. A crackling sound interrupted his thoughts. He quickly turned to see Lieutenant Riker approaching, her face smudged with dirt and her uniform torn. She was carrying a secure transmission device, the kind used for high-risk communications, its screen glowing faintly. "Captain," Riker said, her voice tight, "we've got a problem." Varkov raised an eyebrow, his grip on his rifle tightening. "What kind of problem?" "The Eryxian forces, they've already gotten wind of the intel leak. They're moving in fast. And we've just intercepted a message from General Tyron's command. They know what we found. They're sending a retrieval team to silence us, permanently." Varkov's blood ran cold. He had known the risks of exposing the truth, but the realization that his own government was willing to silence him made his stomach churn. The war had turned into something much darker than anyone could have anticipated. "Damn it," Varkov muttered, slamming his fist against the rubble. "We've been set up. They won't stop at anything to make sure this doesn't get out." Riker looked grim. "We need to get the data off planet, and fast. If we don't, everything we've fought for will have been for nothing." Varkov nodded, his resolve hardening. "We fight. We finish this." He turned, signaling to the squad. There were only a handful of them left, soldiers who had stayed by his side when all hope seemed lost. They were tired, battered, but they were still standing. And that made all the difference. The enemy might have more numbers, better weapons, and superior technology, but they didn't have the will to fight like these men and women did. The squad moved quickly through the crumbled streets, making their way toward the last escape route, a hidden dock used for emergency evacuations. They had to make it there before Tyron's retrieval team or the Eryxians could close in on them. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and the metallic tang of blood. Every step felt heavier than the last, and every distant sound of gunfire sent Varkov's mind into overdrive. The clock was ticking. The mission was clear: survive long enough to broadcast the truth. As they neared the dock, Varkov's comm crackled. "Captain, we've got incoming. 12 o'clock. Riker's voice was sharp, filled with urgency. Varkov looked up and saw them, Eryxian soldiers, heavily armed, moving with a precision that only their kind could manage. They were closing in fast, their massive frames silhouetted against the dying light of the day. "Form up. Hold them off," Varkov shouted, raising his rifle as the squad scattered into defensive positions. He could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins as the first shots rang out, the air filled with the sharp crack of laser fire. It was the kind of battle that seemed to last forever, each shot fired, each movement calculated with the desperation of men who knew they didn't have the luxury of time. The Eryxian soldiers charged forward, their weapons blazing. Varkov's squad fired back, but the enemy's advanced armor absorbed most of the shots. The fighting was fierce in close quarters, the kind of combat that left no room for hesitation. Varkov ducked behind a concrete pillar, his heart pounding. The enemy was relentless, their strategy designed to overwhelm. He glanced over at Riker, who was crouched next to him, her face pale but determined. "We need to push through," she said, gritting her teeth. "We can't hold them off forever." Varkov's mind raced. He knew the odds weren't in their favor, but he wasn't about to give up, not when they were so close. He looked at the transmission device in Riker's hand, the glowing screen showing a countdown to the signal's transmission. "Get that thing ready," he ordered. "I'll cover you." Riker nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. As Varkov stood up to provide cover fire, he could hear the faint hum of the enemy's weapons charging, their steps growing louder with each passing second. Time was running out. With a deep breath, Varkov stepped into the open, his rifle spitting rounds into the advancing Eryxian ranks. He didn't flinch as the bullets slammed into the ground around him. He couldn't afford to. There was no time for fear, no time for hesitation. He fired again and again, each shot landing with deadly precision, until the Eryxians were forced to retreat. The momentary lull in fire gave Varkov the chance he needed. He sprinted toward Riker, reaching her just as she finished preparing the transmission device. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the countdown reach 0. The data was being sent out, faster than he had hoped. "We're done," Varkov said, his voice breathless. Riker gave him a quick nod. "It's out there. The galaxy will know the truth." But the fight wasn't over. Varkov turned to see a new wave of enemy soldiers approaching, this time, led by General Torkin Vesh himself. The alien warlord's face was a mask of cold fury as he stepped forward, flanked by his elite guards. His eyes locked onto Varkov, full of hate and malice. "You think you've won?" Vesh sneered. "You've only unleashed your own doom." Varkov stood his ground, gripping his rifle tightly. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady. "But you'll never silence the truth." Vesh snarled, stepping closer. "You're too late, human. The galaxy will burn before your lies can take root." The battle raged on as Varkov prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that even if they fell today, the truth would live on. The galaxy would know what humanity had done, and perhaps, it would change the future. Perhaps, there would be hope for redemption. But for now, all he could do was fight to the very end. And as the enemy closed in, Varkov whispered one final thought to himself. "This is our legacy."